Jonbenet Ramsey. The murder of Jonbenet Ramsey remains unsolved. The 6-year-old beauty queen was found dead in her family's home in Boulder, Colorado, on December 26, 1996. Throughout the years, there have been many theories about who committed the crime, but no one has been definitively proven to be the perpetrator. The family, including parents Patsy and John Ramsey, and Jonbenet's older brother Burke, have been subjects of suspicion but were officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008. No one person has been definitively identified as the most likely suspect in the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey, which remains an open case. There have been many theories and suspects throughout the years, but none have been conclusively proven to be the murderer. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office have different perspectives on the case, which further complicates the issue. The intruder theory. This theory posits that an unknown intruder broke into the Ramsey house and killed Jonbenet. Supporters of this theory point to a broken basement window, a footprint in the basement, unknown DNA found on Jonbenet's clothing, and the complicated ransom note as evidence of an intruder. The DNA found at the scene did not match any members of the Ramsey family, which led the Boulder District Attorney's Office to officially clear the Ramsey family of involvement in 2008. The family member theory. Early in the investigation, the Boulder Police Department focused on members of the Ramsey family as suspects. This included parents John and Patsy Ramsey, as well as Jonbenet's older brother, Burke Ramsey. Factors leading to this suspicion included the lack of forced entry, the strange ransom note that was written with a pen and paper from the house, and the fact that Jonbenet was found in a rarely used room in the basement. However, as mentioned above, the Ramsey family was officially cleared in 2008 due to DNA evidence. Other theories. Other theories suggest that a friend or associate of the Ramsey family might be responsible. Some point to individuals in the pageant circuit or other people who had access to the home. However, no substantial evidence has definitively linked anyone to the crime. In conclusion, while there are multiple theories about who might have been responsible for Jonbenet's murder, as of my last update in September 2021, no suspect has been definitively identified based on the available evidence. The case remains one of the most notorious unsolved murder cases in American history. For the most current information, please check the latest sources. Determining which theory is statistically most likely in the case of Jonbenet Ramsey's murder is challenging. Without specific evidence pointing to a definitive suspect or motive, it is difficult to assign probabilities or use statistics to determine likelihood. However, it's worth noting that statistically, in cases of child homicide, family members or caregivers are often involved. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, in cases of child homicides, parents are the perpetrators approximately 56% of the time. That being said, this statistical trend does not constitute evidence in the Jonbenet Ramsey case, nor does it prove guilt. Each case is unique and must be evaluated on its own merits and evidence. In the Ramsey case, the family was cleared by DNA evidence in 2008, though some investigators and members of the public have questioned this decision. The intruder theory, which posits that an unknown individual broke into the house and killed Jonbenet, cannot be ruled out either, especially considering the unidentified male DNA found on Jonbenet's clothing. Was there a police cover-up? The Jonbenet Ramsey case is one of the most high-profile unsolved murder cases in American history, and it's been subject to many criticisms, theories, and conjectures over the years. Some of these revolve around alleged mishandling of the case by the Boulder Police Department, leading to speculations of a potential cover-up. However, it's crucial to distinguish between perceived procedural mistakes and a deliberate cover-up. Here's what we know. Criticisms of the Boulder Police Department's handling of the case. 1. Contamination of the crime scene. On the day Jonbenet was found, Many people were allowed to move freely throughout the house, potentially contaminating the crime scene and jeopardizing evidence. For instance, John Ramsey was allowed to search the house, and he ultimately found Jonbenet's body in the basement. 2. Delayed collection of evidence. Certain critical pieces of evidence were not collected immediately. Notably, the alleged ransom note wasn't initially taken into evidence, which could have potentially led to degradation or contamination of fingerprints or other trace evidence. 3. Public statements. Some critics argue that the Boulder Police Department was too quick to focus on the parents as suspects, potentially ignoring other leads. Their public statements at times seem to imply the Ramseys' guilt, further fueling this perception. However, these points do not necessarily indicate a cover-up. They could just as easily be attributed to procedural errors, lack of resources, or lack of experience in handling such a high-profile and complex murder case. Points against a deliberate cover-up. 1. Extensive investigation. Over the years, the Boulder Police Department and other investigative bodies have interviewed hundreds of people, collected extensive physical evidence, and followed countless leads. This level of exhaustive inquiry suggests a genuine effort to solve the crime rather than cover it up. 2. Outside involvement. The case was not solely in the hands of the Boulder Police Department. The FBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and later a grand jury were involved. The more agencies involved, the less likely a cover-up becomes. 3. Public scrutiny. The high-profile nature of the case and the significant public and media scrutiny it received would make a cover-up challenging to execute. 4. DNA evidence. In 2008, new DNA testing methods led to the exoneration of the Ramsey family by the Boulder District Attorney's Office. This shows the department's willingness to follow the evidence even when it led away from their initial suspects. Did Jonbenet die earlier in the evening? The theory that Jonbenet Ramsey might have died earlier in the evening at a Christmas party and that the Ramseys subsequently covered it up is one of many speculative theories that have been put forward over the years. However, this theory, like many others, is not backed by concrete evidence. Let's delve into the reasons for and against this theory. Reasons for: 1. Time of death uncertainty. Determining an exact time of death is notoriously difficult in forensic science, especially after a body has been moved or disturbed. This inherent uncertainty has left room for speculation about when exactly Jonbenet died. 2. The ransom note. Some find the ransom note found at the scene suspicious given its length and the fact that it was reportedly written on paper from inside the Ramsey house. This has led some to theorize that it was part of a staged scene to cover up the true circumstances of Jonbenet's death. Reasons against: 1. Absence of witnesses. The theory that Jonbenet died at a Christmas party would require many individuals to either not notice or actively cover up her death. This seems unlikely given the number of people who would have been present at such a party. No witnesses have come forward to support this theory. 2. Forensic evidence. The autopsy report suggests that Jonbenet was killed by strangulation and a skull fracture. There was also evidence of sexual assault. If Jonbenet had died accidentally at a party, it wouldn't explain these violent injuries. 3. Alibi. There were many people at the Christmas party with the Ramseys who have vouched for their presence and normal behavior throughout the event. 4. Behavior of the parents. After Jonbenet's death, the Ramseys actively sought to find the killer, hiring private investigators and offering rewards for information. This behavior is not typically consistent with parents seeking to cover up their child's death. 5. DNA evidence. Unidentified male DNA was found at the crime scene, which doesn't align with the theory of an accidental death at a party followed by a cover-up. In conclusion, While it's technically possible to construct a narrative in which Jonbenet died earlier at a Christmas party and her death was subsequently covered up by the Ramseys, there is little concrete evidence to support this theory. The suspects. Over the years, many individuals have been considered suspects in the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey. However, it's important to note that none have been definitively proven to be the perpetrator, and the case remains unsolved. Here are some of the more notable individuals who have come under suspicion. John Ramsey. Jonbenet's father was one of the initial suspects. The theory was that he accidentally killed Jonbenet and then staged the crime scene to cover it up. However, he was officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008. John Ramsey, Jonbenet's father, has been a figure of suspicion due to several factors. 1. Discovery of the body. John was the one who found Jonbenet's body in the basement of their home several hours after the police arrived. Some questioned why he and a family friend were allowed to search the home, potentially contaminating the crime scene. His immediate removal of the duct tape from Jonbenet's mouth and carrying her body upstairs also disrupted the crime scene, leading some to speculate he was trying to obscure evidence. 2. Ransom note. The ransom note demanded $118,000, which was almost the exact amount of John's bonus that year. This led some to suspect that John wrote the note himself or was somehow involved. 3. Behavior. Some have critiqued John's calm demeanor during the initial investigation and media interviews as being suspicious. However, it's important to note that people react to stress and grief differently, and such observations are largely subjective. 4. Flight plans. The family's initial plans to fly to Michigan the morning after Jonbenet's death led some to question if John was attempting to flee the scene. However, it's worth noting that this was a pre-scheduled flight for a family vacation, not something arranged after Jonbenet's death. Despite these points, there's no definitive evidence that John Ramsey was involved in his daughter's murder. DNA evidence found at the scene, which belonged to an unknown male, led to John, along with the rest of his immediate family, being officially cleared by the Boulder District Attorney's Office in 2008. Additionally, many of the suspicions around John Ramsey are based on circumstantial evidence, subjective interpretations of his behavior, or speculation, rather than concrete forensic evidence. Like the rest of his family, John Ramsey has always maintained his innocence. Patsy Ramsey. Jonbenet's mother was also an initial suspect, primarily because of the ransom note. Some handwriting experts stated that there were similarities between her handwriting and that on the note. However, like her husband, Patsy was officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008. Patsy Ramsey, Jonbenet's mother, has been the subject of speculation due to several factors. 1. The ransom note. Perhaps the most significant piece of evidence involving Patsy is the ransom note found in the house. The note was written on a pad of paper from the Ramsey home with a pen found at the scene. Handwriting experts were unable to definitively exclude Patsy as the author of the note, though none could positively identify her handwriting either. Some critics believe that the length and content of the note suggest that it was staged. 2. Initial 911 call. Patsy's behavior during the initial 911 call has been analyzed, with some claiming she seemed overly dramatic or that she did not hang up the phone properly, potentially leading to an overheard conversation. These interpretations are largely subjective and not definitive proof of guilt or innocence. 3. Bed wedding theory. One theory suggests that Patsy, frustrated with Jonbenet's chronic bed wedding, struck her daughter in a fit of rage, inflicting the fatal head injury. Then the theory suggests she staged the crime scene to cover up her actions. However, this theory is purely speculative and not based on concrete evidence. 4. Patsy's interviews and public appearances. Some observers pointed to Patsy's controlled demeanor during interviews and press conferences as suspicious. However, reactions to trauma can vary widely, and such observations are largely subjective. 5. Patsy's cancer. Patsy was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in 1993, 3 years before Jonbenet's murder. Some have speculated that her health crisis may have contributed to stress or mental instability, leading her to harm Jonbenet, though this is entirely speculative and not based on any concrete evidence. Despite these points, it's important to note that there's no conclusive evidence that Patsy Ramsey was involved in her daughter's murder. In 2008, Patsy, along with the rest of her immediate family, was officially cleared by the Boulder District Attorney's Office due to DNA evidence found at the scene, which belonged to an unknown male. Patsy Ramsey died in 2006, maintaining her innocence until the end. Burke Ramsey. Jonbenet's older brother was only 9 years old at the time of her death. Some have speculated that he accidentally killed Jonbenet during a fight and that his parents covered up the crime to protect him. Burke was officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008, and he has consistently maintained his innocence. Burke Ramsey, Jonbenet's older brother, was initially not publicly considered a suspect by the Boulder Police Department because he was only 9 years old at the time of Jonbenet's death. However, he came under public scrutiny years later, particularly after a 2016 CBS documentary, The Case of Jonbenet Ramsey, in which a team of investigators suggested that Burke may have accidentally killed Jonbenet and the parents staged the murder scene to protect him. The theory is based on several factors. Interview behavior. Some behavior analysts suggested that Burke's demeanor in police interviews shortly after the murder was unusual, including his lack of emotional affect and apparent lack of awareness of the gravity of the situation. It is important to note, however, that behavior in interviews can be influenced by many factors and does not provide definitive evidence of guilt or innocence. Pineapple evidence. A bowl of pineapple was found on the kitchen table, and autopsy reports indicated that Jonbenet had eaten pineapple shortly before her death. Burke's fingerprints were found on the bowl. This was seen as significant because the parents had initially stated that Jonbenet was asleep when they returned home and she didn't eat anything. The flashlight. A flashlight found in the kitchen was identified as a possible murder weapon because it could have caused Jonbenet's head injuries. Some believe that Burke could have hit Jonbenet with the flashlight, perhaps in anger or as part of a sibling squabble, not intending serious harm. Later interviews. Some pointed to Burke's behavior in later interviews, such as his 2016 interview with Dr. Phil, as evidence, noting his smiling demeanor when discussing his sister's death. Again, it's crucial to remember that reactions to trauma can vary widely, and someone's demeanor in an interview isn't conclusive proof of guilt or innocence. Despite these points, there's no concrete evidence to definitively implicate Burke in his sister's death. The DNA found at the scene did not match any members of the Ramsey family, and Burke, like his parents, was officially cleared by the Boulder District Attorney's Office in 2008. Furthermore, both Burke and his parents have consistently maintained that Burke had nothing to do with Jonbenet's death. In 2016, Burke filed a defamation lawsuit against CBS and the experts featured in the documentary for suggesting that he killed his sister, which was settled in 2019. John Andrew Ramsey is the half-brother of Jonbenet Ramsey and the son of John Ramsey from his first marriage. He, like all family members, came under initial scrutiny in the aftermath of Jonbenet's murder due to the nature of the crime and the lack of evidence of a break-in at the Ramsey home. Here's what we know about his connection to the case. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Familial relationship. As a member of the Ramsey family, John Andrew was initially part of the circle of individuals who were investigated in relation to the murder. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Alibi. John Andrew Ramsey was reportedly out of state when the murder occurred. He was in Atlanta, Georgia, with his sister Melinda. 2. DNA mismatch. The DNA found at the scene of the crime, a sample of male DNA, did not match that of John Andrew Ramsey. This DNA evidence led the Boulder District Attorney to publicly exonerate the Ramsey family in 2008. Based on the available information, it seems highly unlikely that John Andrew Ramsey was involved in the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey. His strong alibi and the DNA evidence make his involvement improbable. Bill McReynolds. McReynolds, a family friend who had played Santa Claus at a holiday party at the Ramsey home, was considered a suspect because of his familiarity with the family. Over the years, many theories have been proposed to explain the tragic murder of Jonbenet Ramsey, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. One of the more unusual theories involves a Santa Claus impersonator. Bill McReynolds, who played Santa Claus at a holiday party at the Ramsey home 2 days before Jonbenet's death, came under suspicion due to his familiarity with the family and because his own daughter had been kidnapped 22 years prior to Jonbenet's death. On the same date, December 26, McReynolds also reportedly gave Jonbenet a card that said, "You will receive a special gift after Christmas." Furthermore, McReynolds' wife wrote a play about a child getting molested and then murdered in a basement. However, no physical evidence linked McReynolds to the crime scene, and his DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found on Jonbenet's clothing. Additionally, the Boulder Police Department did not consider him a serious suspect in the case. Gary Oliva. Oliva, a registered sex offender, was living in Boulder at the time of Jonbenet's death. He was considered a suspect because of his criminal history and because he allegedly confessed to a friend that he had hurt a little girl. However, his DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene. Ari Oliva is a registered sex offender who was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time of Jonbenet Ramsey's murder, and he has come under public scrutiny several times in connection with the case. Here are the key points. 1. Criminal history. Oliva's criminal history and his presence in the Boulder area at the time of the murder have caused some to view him as a potential suspect. His previous offenses included crimes against minors. 2. Alleged confessions. Oliva has reportedly made several confessions to killing Jonbenet over the years. In one instance, he allegedly told a high school friend that he had hurt a little girl in Boulder. In another, he reportedly made a confession to a counselor. 3. Obsession with Jonbenet. Oliva has demonstrated an apparent obsession with Jonbenet, which he has expressed in letters to a friend. In 2000, when he was arrested on unrelated charges, police found a photo of Jonbenet in his backpack. 4. Inconsistent statements. Oliva has made inconsistent statements about his involvement in the murder. In some instances, he has seemingly confessed, while in others, he has denied involvement. Despite these points, there's no definitive evidence that Gary Oliva was involved in Jonbenet's murder. Most significantly, his DNA does not match the unidentified male DNA found at the scene. Furthermore, while his alleged confessions and obsession with Jonbenet are disturbing, they do not provide concrete evidence of his involvement in the crime. As with other suspects in this case, many of the suspicions around Gary Oliva are based on circumstantial evidence, his criminal history, and his own inconsistent statements, rather than concrete forensic evidence. John Mark Carr. Carr confessed to the crime in 2006. But his confession was widely regarded as a fabrication because he was unable to provide details of the crime that weren't publicly available. His DNA also did not match the crime scene sample, and there was no evidence to place him in Boulder at the time of the murder. John Mark Carr, a former schoolteacher, made international headlines in 2006 when he falsely confessed to killing Jonbenet Ramsey. However, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that Carr was not involved in Jonbenet's murder. 1. False confession. Carr's confession, made while he was living in Thailand, was elaborate and detailed. He claimed that he had drugged and sexually assaulted Jonbenet, then accidentally killed her. However, his confession was inconsistent with the evidence. The autopsy found no drugs in Jonbenet's system, and the nature of her injuries did not match Carr's account. 2. No physical evidence. There was no physical evidence linking Carr to the crime scene. His DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found on Jonbenet's clothing. 3. Alibi. Family members insisted that Carr was in Georgia, not Colorado, at the time of the murder, providing him with an alibi. Although this alibi was not definitively confirmed, it cast further doubt on his confession. 4. Obsession with the case. Carr had a known obsession with the Jonbenet Ramsey case, as well as with the case of Polyclius, a child who was abducted and murdered in California in 1993. His detailed knowledge of the case likely came from his extensive research rather than personal involvement. 5. Behavior and statements. Carr's behavior and statements after his arrest further undermined his credibility. He seemed to enjoy the attention he was receiving, and his descriptions of his relationship with Jonbenet were fantastical and implausible. After his arrest, Carr was extradited to the United States, but the Boulder County District Attorney's Office quickly dropped the case against him due to the lack of evidence. Carr's false confession is considered a notorious example of the challenges involved in high-profile criminal investigations, particularly the difficulty of separating fact from fiction. Michael Helgoth. Helgoth's death shortly after Jonbenet's murder led some to suspect him. His property was searched, but no evidence linking him to the crime was found. Michael Helgoth was a local Boulder resident who came to public attention in connection with Jonbenet Ramsey's murder due to several circumstantial factors. 1. Death. Helgoth died by suicide in February 1997, just a few months after Jonbenet's murder. His death, in close proximity to the crime, aroused suspicions. 2. Boots. A pair of high-tech brand boots owned by Helgoth allegedly matched a footprint found at the Ramsey crime scene. 3. Taser. A stun gun was reportedly found among Helgoth's belongings after his death. Some investigators believe a stun gun was used in Jonbenet's murder due to marks found on her body, though this is dispute. 4. Suspected burglaries. Helgoth was reportedly involved in car salvaging and was suspected of being involved in local burglaries, contributing to a profile of potential criminal behavior. Despite these points, there's no definitive evidence linking Helgoth to Jonbenet's murder. 1. DNA. Crucially, Helgoth's DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene. 2. Alibi. Reports suggest that Helgoth had an alibi for the night of the murder. According to a friend, they were together until early morning hours on December 26, 1996, which would likely exclude him as a suspect. Like many individuals associated with the case, Helgoth's connection is largely based on circumstantial evidence and speculation, rather than concrete forensic evidence. Chris Wolf. Wolf, a local journalist, was considered a suspect by the Ramseys because of his alleged erratic behavior. He sued the Ramseys for defamation, and the suit was settled out of court. No evidence links him to the crime. Chris Wolf, a local journalist in Boulder at the time of Jonbenet Ramsey's murder, was another person of interest in the case. Here are the key points. 1. His girlfriend's statement. Wolf's then-girlfriend reportedly told police that he had disappeared for several hours on the night of Jonbenet's murder, and that he had arrived home dressed in all black. She also said that she found a pair of black boots in his possession that matched a footprint found at the crime scene. 2. Interest in the case. Wolf showed a particular interest in the case and was critical of the Ramseys and the police handling of the investigation. This in itself is not incriminating, as he was a journalist, but it did bring him to the attention of investigators. 3. Legal action. Wolf eventually sued the Ramseys for defamation after being named as a suspect in a book written by John and Patsy Ramsey. However, as with other suspects in this case, there's no definitive evidence that Wolf was involved in Jonbenet's murder. 1. DNA. Wolf's DNA does not match the unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene. 2. No physical evidence. Apart from the footprint, which was never definitively linked to Wolf, there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. Linda Hoffman, Pew. The Ramsey family's housekeeper was considered a suspect because of her access to the home. However, she cooperated with the police and no evidence has been found to link her to the crime. Linda Hoffman, Pew, was the Ramsey family's housekeeper and was considered a person of interest early in the investigation. Here are the key points. 1. Access and knowledge. As the housekeeper, Linda had access to the Ramsey home and was familiar with its layout. She also knew where to find pen and paper in the house. The ransom note was written with a pen and on paper from the Ramseys' home. Linda also knew about John Ramsey's $118,000 bonus, the same amount demanded in the ransom note. 2. Financial difficulties. It was reported that Linda and her husband had financial troubles, and she had once asked Patsy Ramsey for a loan of several $1,000s. This led to speculation that she may have had a financial motive for a kidnapping plot. 3. Police interviews. During her interviews with the police, Linda shared her suspicions about the Ramsey family's involvement in the crime, particularly pointing towards Patsy Ramsey. Her interviews, while not implicating her, drew attention to her knowledge of the family and the household. However, there's no definitive evidence linking Linda Hoffman, Pew, to Jonbenet's murder. 1. DNA. The unknown male DNA found at the crime scene did not match Linda's DNA. 2. Polygraph test. Linda reportedly passed a polygraph test, lie detector test, during the investigation which, while not foolproof, suggested she was not knowingly lying about her involvement. 3. Cooperation with investigation. Linda cooperated fully with the police investigation and publicly maintained her innocence. Robert Christian Wolf. He was named by John and Patsy Ramsey in their book as a potential suspect due to his alleged presence in Boulder, Colorado, and his criminal record. He sued the Ramseys for defamation, but the case was dismissed. Robert Christian Wolf, not to be confused with local journalist Chris Wolf, was considered a person of interest due to a series of coincidences and circumstantial evidence. Here are the key points. 1. Presence in Boulder. Wolf was in Boulder at the time of the murder and was known to be living a transient lifestyle. This in itself is not incriminating, but it did bring him to the attention of investigators. 2. Legal action. Wolf was named as a potential suspect in a book written by private investigator Ollie Gray, who was hired by the Ramsey family to investigate the case. Wolf eventually sued the Ramseys and Gray for defamation, a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court before being dismissed. However, as with other persons of interest in this case, there's no definitive evidence linking Robert Christian Wolf to Jonbenet's murder. 1. DNA. The unknown male DNA found at the crime scene did not match Wolf's DNA. 2. Lack of physical evidence. There was no physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. Fleet White, a close friend of the Ramsey family at the time of Jonbenet Ramsey's murder, came under suspicion due to his close proximity to the family and his presence at the crime scene on the morning of Jonbenet's disappearance. However, it's important to note that suspicion does not equate to guilt. Let's delve deeper into the reasons for suspicion and the evidence for and against his involvement. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Fleet White was one of the first people John Ramsey called upon discovering the ransom note. He was present at the Ramsey house before the police arrived. 2. Given their close relationship, some speculated he might have had access to the house or knowledge of its layout, which could have facilitated the crime. 3. The complexity of the crime scene led some to believe that the murder was an inside job, implicating those close to the family. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Fleet White was extensively interviewed, and his house was searched by the Boulder Police Department. No evidence was found linking him to the crime. 2. DNA evidence found on Jonbenet's clothing did not match Fleet White. 3. The Boulder Police Department and Boulder District Attorney's Office have both publicly cleared Fleet White of any involvement in the case. To date, no credible evidence has been presented that directly implicates Fleet White in the crime. Based on the available evidence and the official statements of law enforcement, it seems unlikely that Fleet White was involved in the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey. While he was initially a person of interest due to his close proximity to the family, the lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime, combined with the results of the police investigation, have largely dismissed him as a suspect. Glenn Mayer, a neighbor of the Ramseys, was one of many individuals who came under scrutiny in the aftermath of Jonbenet Ramsey's tragic murder due to his proximity and the fact that he lived in the basement of a house across the street from the Ramseys. The police did investigate him as part of their exhaustive inquiries, as they did with many associated with the family or living in the vicinity. Here's what we know about his connection to the case. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Proximity. Mir lived just across the street from the Ramsey home. This close proximity raised questions, as the investigators believed that the person responsible had knowledge of the Ramsey home layout. 2. Basement living. Mir lived in the basement of the home he occupied, which drew parallels to the basement setting of Jonbenet's murder. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Lack of direct evidence. There's no direct evidence linking Mir to the crime. He was one of many people investigated, and no public evidence has been presented that implicates him. 2. DNA mismatch. The DNA evidence found at the scene did not match Meyer. The unidentified male DNA found on Jonbenet's clothing has never been definitively matched to any individual. No specific evidence has been produced that connects Glenn Mayer to the crime. Based on the information available, it seems that Glenn Mayer, like many individuals close to the case, was looked into due to his proximity to the Ramsey family. However, without concrete evidence tying him to the crime, it is not appropriate to infer his involvement. It's crucial to note that suspicion alone does not equate to guilt, and all individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Jeff Merrick, a former employee of Access Graphics, the company where Jonbenet's father, John Ramsey, worked, did come under scrutiny in the aftermath of the murder. His relationship with the Ramseys and subsequent termination from Access Graphics made him a person of interest in the investigation. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Prior relationship with the Ramseys. Jeff Merrick was known to have had a personal relationship with the Ramsey family and had worked closely with John Ramsey at Access Graphics. 2. Termination from Access Graphics. Merrick was fired from his job, which led to him filing a lawsuit against John Ramsey and the company. 3. The lawsuit. Following his termination, Merrick reportedly was involved in a protracted dispute with John Ramsey and Access Graphics, which included allegations of unfair dismissal. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Lack of physical evidence. To my knowledge, as of my training cutoff in September 2021, there has been no physical evidence linking Jeff Merrick to the crime scene or the murder itself. 2. Alibi. According to some sources, Merrick was reported to be out of state at the time of JonBenet's murder. There has been no specific evidence presented publicly linking Jeff Merrick directly to the crime. Joe and Betty Barnhill were neighbors of the Ramsey family at the time of JonBenet's murder, and because of their proximity and familiarity with the family, they came under initial scrutiny. It's important to clarify that they were not primary suspects, but were part of the wide circle of individuals who were interviewed and investigated due to their relationship with the Ramsey family. Reasons for suspicion: 1. Proximity. The Barnhills lived across the street from the Ramsey family. The investigators initially considered anyone with access or familiarity to the house as a potential person of interest. 2. Familiarity. The Barnhills were reportedly familiar with the Ramsey family. Joe Barnhill even used to look after JonBenet's dog, Jacques Fox. Evidence against their involvement: 1. Lack of motive and evidence. No motive or specific evidence has been publicly presented that implicates the Barnhills in the crime. 2. Alibi. It's reported that the Barnhills were home together on the night of the murder. 3. DNA mismatch. The unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene did not match the Barnhills. 4. Age and health. At the time of the crime, the Barnhills were elderly and Joe Barnhill was in poor health, making it unlikely they could have committed the crime. Based on the information available, it seems unlikely that the Barnhills were involved in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. While they were initially part of the broader investigation due to their proximity and relationship with the Ramsey family, the lack of specific evidence connecting them to the crime and their reported alibi make their involvement unlikely. It's important to highlight that a significant number of individuals have been questioned or considered throughout the investigation of this high-profile case. It's also worth noting that for many people who have been mentioned in connection with the case, the information is based on rumor, speculation, or circumstantial evidence. While some individuals have been publicly named in connection to the case, many have not been officially named as suspects or persons of interest by law enforcement. The ransom note found in the JonBenet Ramsey case is a significant piece of evidence that continues to perplex investigators and observers. The note was unusually long for a ransom note, and some of its details seemed peculiar. Here are a few key points that might provide some logical context. 1. Source of the paper and pen. The ransom note was written on paper from a notepad found in the Ramsey house with a pen from the house as well. If an intruder wrote the note, they would have spent a significant amount of time in the house both finding these items and writing the note, which is unusual for a break. 2. Content and length. The note was nearly 3 pages long, which is extremely lengthy compared to typical ransom notes. It also contained a number of odd phrases and references, such as a specific ransom amount that matched John Ramsey's bonus that year and a sign off from a small foreign faction, a phrase that hasn't been associated with any known group. 3. Handwriting analysis. Handwriting analysis did not conclusively identify the author of the note. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenet's mother, was initially said to be a possible match, but no definitive conclusions were drawn. If a family member did write the note, it could suggest an attempt to mislead investigators. 4. Timing of the note's creation. If an intruder wrote the note before the crime, this would imply a level of planning and risk. Taking that seems inconsistent with the chaotic nature of the crime scene. If the note was written after the crime, it's difficult to understand why an intruder would linger at the scene. 5. The note's discovery. The note was discovered on a staircase by Patsy Ramsey, not in JonBenet's room or attached to her in any way. This is also unusual for a ransom situation. In sum, the ransom note raises more questions than it answers. It's one of the many reasons why the JonBenet Ramsey case has remained unsolved for so long. Some interpret the note as evidence of an intruder, while others see it as a potential effort to stage a crime scene. Without more conclusive evidence, its true origins and purpose remain a matter of speculation. The $118,000 ransom demand in the Jonbenet Ramsey case is indeed an unusual detail. This exact amount was nearly the same as a bonus that John Ramsey, Jonbenet's father, had received that year, which was a public record. This detail has been interpreted in a few different ways. 1. Inside knowledge. If the ransom note writer had knowledge of John Ramsey's exact bonus amount, this could indicate that the person had some sort of inside knowledge or connection to John Ramsey's work. 2. Coincidence. It's also possible that the matching amounts could be a coincidence. If the ransom note was an attempt to mislead investigators or cover up the crime, the person who wrote it might have chosen an amount they believed sounded reasonable without knowing about John Ramsey's bonus. 3. Misdirection. Another possibility is that the person who wrote the note knew about the bonus and intentionally used the same amount to mislead investigators, making it appear as if someone with inside knowledge of Ramsey's finances was involved. As with many aspects of the Jonbenet Ramsey case, without more definitive evidence or a confession, it's difficult to know for sure why this specific amount was chosen. The ransom note and the unusual amount demanded continue to be key pieces of evidence in this unsolved case. The official cause of Jonbenet Ramsey's death, according to the autopsy report, was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma, which means she was strangled and suffered a severe skull fracture. This combination of severe injuries makes it highly unlikely that her death was accidental. However, there has been speculation that the initial injury, the blow to the head, could have been accidental, and that the strangulation and staging of a kidnapping might have been an attempt to cover up the accident. The blow to Jonbenet's head was severe enough to render her unconscious and possibly appear dead, even though it did not immediately kill her. The strangulation occurred approximately 45 minutes to 2 hours after the head injury, according to the autopsy report. This theory has been brought up in various discussions about the case, but it's important to stress that it is just a theory. Without more conclusive evidence, it's not possible to definitively say what happened the night Jonbenet died. AI can generate probable statistical values. John Ramsey, 15%. Patsy Ramsey, 15%. Burke Ramsey, 10%. Gary Oliva, 5%. Michael Helgoth, 5%. Chris Wolf, 5%. Robert Christian Wolf, 4%. Linda Hoffman, Pugh, 3%. Mervyn Pugh, 3%. Fleet White, 3%. Jeff Merrick, 3%. Bill McReynolds, 2%. Glenn Mayer, 2%. Other Neighbor, 2%. Stephen Miles, 2%. Gary Merriman, 2%. Jim Marino, 2%. Lorraine Florence Lawrence, 1%. John Mark Carr, 1%. John Andrew Ramsey, 1%. Bill Ramsey Larry Ron, 1%.